3 decades after her son vanished, this woman discovered the truth in a KFC. One moment, Lynette Mann Lewis had a newborn son and a loving husband with whom she made a happy home, in short, everything she ever wanted. Then it all started to fall apart. First, Lynette and her husband, Alan Mann Jr., separated. Next, they had to go through a lengthy legal battle to decide on how they would raise their son, Jermaine Alan Mann. While all that seemed like enough trouble, she would soon experience the worst tragedy a mother can when Alan allegedly kidnapped Jermaine. For over 3 decades after they vanished, Lynette searched all over the United States and Canada for her son and former husband. Just when it seemed as though Lynette would never see her son again, the truth appeared in the strangest of locations, a KFC in Connecticut. Once upon a time, Lynette Mann Lewis and Alan Mann Jr., from Toronto, Canada, had a healthy relationship. They married, settled into a home together, and eventually had a son, Jermaine Alan Mann. However, as time went on, things started to fall apart. Soon enough, Lynette and Alan realized they could not make it work and separated. From there, things only became worse and worse for Lynette, Alan, and Jermaine. The two went through a lengthy legal battle to decide on how much time each parent would take care of Jermaine. Just after Jermaine turned 1 year old, Lynette and Alan worked out a shared custody agreement. Finally, after all this time, Lynette could move on with her life, but she had no idea her troubles were just beginning. In the weeks following their shared custody agreement, Lynette and Alan fell into a routine. Every other weekend, Alan would pick up Jermaine and spend the weekend with him. For months, everything went smoothly, so when Lynette dropped Jermaine off with Alan one weekend in June 1987, she didn't think much of it. The mother believed she would be reunited with her son shortly. Unfortunately, she was very wrong. Lynette started to feel uneasy when she called Alan to check on Jermaine, but her former husband did not answer. However, that didn't mean anything in particular. He could have just been out. On Monday morning, Lynette drove to Alan's house to pick up Jermaine, and that's when her life changed forever. When Lynette arrived at Alan's apartment to pick up Jermaine, she knocked, but there was no answer. He had never missed a pickup appointment before, and even worse, his car was not in the parking lot. As more time passed, Alan never returned to his apartment. In fact, he was never seen there again. While Lynette tried every method of contacting her former husband, nothing worked. While Lynette felt sick to her stomach, she knew she needed to keep a level head and exhaust every option to find her Jermaine, and she knew where she needed to start: by contacting the police. So that's precisely what the worried mother did. When Lynette Mann Lewis arrived at the Toronto Police Service station, they took the case very seriously. Unfortunately, it was not the first time the police had dealt with a kidnapping, and they knew every second mattered, so they started looking for leads and clues anywhere they could. For a moment, the case seemed encouraging. The police quickly found enough clues and evidence to start pursuing Alan and hopefully finding Jermaine. However, when the police followed the clues, they soon came to a massive hurdle. In fact, it would bring the case to a screeching halt, breaking Lynette's heart in the process. The officers working the case of Jermaine's abduction were certainly not lazy. Incredibly, over the course of their investigation, they interviewed over 400 people. However, the more they investigated, the worse things looked for Lynette. You see, the police soon discovered that Alan had ways to obtain forged documents. In the end, the Toronto Police Department surmised that Alan had taken Jermaine over the border to the United States using illegal documents to do so. That certainly made the case a lot harder. After all, it would now need to be taken up by United States police teams. And Lynette had no idea where Alan had taken her son. The situation seemed hopeless. Thankfully, it was not entirely hopeless. It seemed the trail to Jermaine had gone cold. However, the Toronto police were able to give Lynette some glimmers of hope. Through their interviews and investigation, the police felt confident that Alan and Jermaine had settled down somewhere in the northeastern portion of the United States. While the information eliminated most of the states, it still left over 162,257 square miles of land where Alan could hide with forged documents bearing other names. Decades passed, and all Lynette could do was wonder about her son. Had he grown up well, attended college, made something of himself? The mother's heart broke at the thought of never knowing the answers to these questions. Eventually, Lynette moved, and the case was transferred to the Calgary Police Service. There, Officer Ted Davis took an interest in the case. However, he soon found out why it had been turned into a cold case. We were looking for a needle in a haystack, and this was a really big haystack," Davis later said. Incredibly, Davis did not let the size of the haystack scare him from Germain's cold case. He kept looking for leads and clues with great vigor. Deep inside, Officer Davis felt convinced he would come across something others had missed, which would lead him to Alan and Germain. Davis did what few other police officers would do: pursue a cold case until the end of his career. In fact, believe it or not, Davis continued to work with Lynette to help find her son even after he retired. Soon enough, the retired police officer also teamed up with the Missing and Exploited Children Society of Canada to find more leads. Throughout the years, Davis did much more than look for Germain. As you can see in the photo above, he also became a rock that Lynette could lean on. "Ted encouraged me to always believe," she said, working with the Missing and Exploited Children Society of Canada. Davis came up with a way to get the word out about Germain's missing person case. Using state-of-the-art technology, the society created sophisticated photos of what Germain would look like as a young man. By this point, Lynette had not seen her son in over 20 years. After creating the photos, Missing and Exploited Children Society of Canada worked with other missing child agencies in the United States to spread the aged-up picture of Germain around, and not long after, more clues started popping up. Although it took nearly 30 years for new clues about Germain's whereabouts to emerge, Lynette never lost hope. Whenever you talked to her, you could tell that she was still persistent and passionate about getting her son back, Officer Davis later stated. Finally, in 2016, Lynette's hope and strength started to pan out. There was new information about her son's whereabouts. The new development started when Davis went to a police convention in 2016, where he gave a presentation on cold cases and missing children cases. There, he met some U.S. Marshals who wanted to help Lynette find her son, and with all the technology at their fingertips, it did not take the Marshals long at all to find some information about Alan and Germain. As soon as they returned to Washington, D.C., the U.S. Marshals started working on locating Alan Mann Jr. and Germain. The first thing they did was look for any relatives or friends that Alan might have had in the United States. While it took some time, they discovered that Alan actually did have some distant relatives in the northeastern portion of the country. Of course, the Marshals immediately started contacting them and asking some questions. Soon enough, they learned that Alan and Germain had first settled down in the Bronx, New York City. After leaving Canada, after living there for nearly 20 years, Alan told different relatives different things. To some, the man said he and his son were relocating to North Carolina. To others, he said Connecticut. And that's not all. The investigation turned up. To narrow down their search, the U.S. Marshals worked with the Missing and Exploited Children Society of Canada. Using the advanced technology they possessed, the society managed to create a photo of what Alan looked like as an adult. Now they had someone specific to look for. Afterward, the U.S. Marshals needed to do the long legwork. They started comparing the photo of aged-up Alan to driver's licenses in North Carolina, Connecticut, and New York. And one man named Haley D'Souza looked quite a bit like Alan. Could it be that they had finally discovered Alan's secret identity? The U.S. Marshals finally managed to determine that Alan had, in fact, changed his name to Haley D'Souza. He did so not only to hide from his former wife, but he also allegedly collected benefits from the U.S. government, and not just a little bit. Under the name D'Souza, Alan had managed to take nearly $55,000 in medical aid and $125,000 in housing benefits. If Alan was found guilty of all these crimes, he would go to prison first in Canada and then the United States. Needless to say, the U.S. Marshals upped their efforts to find Alan and Germain. By this point, a number of agencies had come together in order to bring a mother together with her long-lost son. In this Herculean effort, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Toronto Police, the Department of Homeland Security, and of course, the U.S. Marshals Service all came together to rescue a man who probably had no idea he had been kidnapped as a baby. But all the police agencies did not do the work alone. In fact, without the public's help and agencies like Missing and Exploited Children Society of Canada, the case of Germain and Alan would have remained cold forever. Now they were on the cusp of a massive discovery. Law enforcement officers had now determined that Alan was going by the name Haley D'Souza. As such, they soon managed to pull all of the paperwork Alan had allegedly illegally filed over the years. In addition to applying for government support, he had also filed for a new birth certificate for Jermaine as well as Social Security. The birth certificate listed Jermaine's birthplace as Dallas, Texas, something the marshals knew was false. The illegally filed documents gave the investigators much more than Alan's history in the United States. However, it also revealed where he had settled down, Vernon, Connecticut. Over the next few weeks, the U.S. Marshals and Department of Homeland Security started closing in around Alan. Now that they had his fake name, Haley D'Souza, they were able to narrow down his location to Connecticut. In the city of Vernon, the marshals even had an address where Alan lived, but they still had no idea if they would find Jermaine there as well. After all, by this point, it had been over 3 decades since Alan had taken him to the United States. The day had come for the marshals to approach Alan. While Jermaine's father was not found in his home, the police found him in a nearby location, where they cautiously approached him. The police found Alan Mann Jr., using the name Haley D'Souza in KFC in Vernon, Connecticut. Thankfully, Alan went with the police without violence or incident. During his arrest, the officers took Alan's fingerprints, which they then compared to a pair kept by the Canadian police. They were an identical match. Not only that, but he also immediately put the marshals in contact with Jermaine, while Officer Ted Davis, the Canadian detective who had been working on the case since before his retirement, wanted to contact Lyneth Mann Lewis right away. He decided to hold off. He wanted to confirm that they had found the right Jermaine before getting the mother's hopes up too high. There was also another reason Davis held on to the information. Officer Ted Davis did not just want to confirm Jermaine's identity. He also wanted to tell Lyneth that he had found her son in person. You can't tell someone after waiting 31 years over the telephone or FaceTime. "Hey, listen, I found your son," Davis later said. Soon enough, the marshals and Davis were able to confirm Jermaine's identity and fill him in on what was going on. It must have been quite a shock to learn his father had allegedly kidnapped him and that his mother had been searching for him for decades. Now the time had finally come for Lyneth and Jermaine to reunite, after more than 30 years. Lyneth Mann Lewis finally reunited with her son, Jermaine. It's been a long and hard 31-year journey since my son was abducted, and I endured many, many hard days, the mother said. The words, "Your son is alive, we found him," that is breathtaking as you might imagine. The reunion was quite an emotional one. At first, the mother could hardly believe that it was real. "I squeezed his head, I wanted to feel if he was real," he said. "Mommy, you have my eyes." He hugged me and he kissed me, and we held for a long time, Lynette said afterward. When Lynette and Jermaine finally met again, there was not a dry eye in the house. Even the Canadian police officers, who have seen quite a lot over the years, found themselves welling up with tears. This is one of those rare cases that tugs at your heartstrings. Not only did we, working collectively, get this alleged bad actor off the street, but we played a role in reuniting an unjustly separated family. Canadian Inspector General Representative Christina Scoring said of the special moment. Meanwhile, Lynette also had a few words for all those that had helped her find her son. Lynette found it hard to say precisely how happy and grateful she felt after 31 years of looking for her son. "Words couldn't express what I felt," she said afterward. Most of all, Lynette says she holds Officer Ted Davis in the highest regard. After all, he had started working on the case more than 20 years before its conclusion and kept working on it after he retired from the force. "I will forever be grateful for him for everything he has done," the mother said. Now, Lynette had to start the incredible task of getting to know her son. They had 30 years to catch up on. As soon as Lynette and Jermaine finally reunited, they immediately started getting to know one another. "We sat in the hotel and we talked and he didn't want to leave. Finally, he said, 'Mom, I love you,' and I said, 'I love you too, son.'" She later recalled of their first days together. While Lynette and Jermaine got to know one another better, there was another side of the investigation happening. The Canadian legal system was preparing to prosecute Alan Mann Jr. for his actions. However, the case would turn into an international mess of various trials, making everything more difficult. First, we should begin by reiterating that everyone is innocent until proven guilty, which is undoubtedly the case when it comes to Alan. However, Canadian law enforcement has decided to bring charges against him. namely abduction charges. They will also charge him with fraud charges. They lived basically a life of lies as to who they were and what they did, an unnamed representative of the Toronto law enforcement commented. Meanwhile, Fox News recently reported the United States is also building a case against Allen for fraud, one that will occur after the Canadian trial. While two trials make everything much more challenging, the legal teams feel confident they are up to the tasks. No questions asked. Lynette and Jermaine have a long road ahead of them. They face big problems, both big and small. For instance, Jermaine mentioned that he doesn't know exactly what to have his mother call him. He didn't grow up with the name Jermaine, but now any other name feels like a lie, the name that was given to him, he had no choice in. This is the end of the long struggle of not knowing where he is, but going forward will be a hard life for now, Lynette said. Still, despite these challenges, Lynette and Jermaine feel confident that they can overcome them. Meanwhile, they have become an inspiration to many parents missing children and orphans around the world, while the fate of Allen might remain undecided for now. At least Lynette has her son back, and that's what really matters. As such, she's become an inspiration for thousands of parents all over the world who are also missing a child. I want to encourage other families with missing children and loved ones not to ever give up hope on finding them. I am the proof that after 31 long years of suffering, 31 long years, one should never give up but be patient, be strong, and believe that all things are possible and that anything can transpire, Lynette said in a recent interview. The story of Jermaine and Lynette is one of love and good news. It has a happy ending, all thanks to the power of people and technology teaming up to help find a missing boy. However, there are many other children who have been lost or kidnapped that have not had their happy reunion yet, so let Jermaine and Lynette serve as a reminder of how important it is to never give up on cold cases. Sometimes, interestingly enough, it's not the police who solve these cold cases. Rarely a private investigator or retired police officer cracks the case. Other times, some of the people involved solving their own mysteries. Read on for one of these incredible stories. As stated, each year sadly thousands of children go missing. Some cases like Jermaine and Lynette's are solved after decades. Even worse, some cases remain unsolved forever. One adopted man, Stephen Carter Jr., knew this pain all too well. You see, Carter enjoyed a seemingly normal childhood despite being adopted. He went on vacations, had birthday parties, and did everything else a growing boy should do. However, as an adult, Carter found himself wondering where he came from, so he decided to try and track down his birth parents. After doing a little digging, Carter could hardly believe what he found. He saw his own photo on a missing persons website. That's right, and things only became more strange from there. From a very young age, now 43-year-old Stephen Carter Jr. knew that his parents adopted him from an orphanage as a toddler. However, the rest of the details about how he arrived there always remained a mystery to him. Still, even as an adopted boy, Carter knew how lucky he was to end up in a loving, safe home. The best part of all, he loved his adoptive parents, Stephen Sr. and Pat. Everything seemed perfect, but as Carter grew up, he started to realize that the details surrounding his adoption simply did not add up. So after years of living with his adoptive family, Carter decided to search for the truth. As he began, he had no idea his search would take him all over the United States, from the beautiful shores of Hawaii to the gritty streets of New York City. Carter's birth name was Tenzin. After his birth on January 16, 1977, in Hawaii, baby Tenzin became a ward of the state after his mother simply vanished. Amy has spent the next few years both foster care and an orphanage on the island of Oahu. While even as a very young man, Tenzin wanted to join a family, it took some time. The years slipped by before the young child finally left the orphanage. Sadly, he remained in the orphanage until he was 3 years old. That's right, then suddenly his luck changed. After watching this story, how do you feel? Then there is another story. Let's continue. In the bustling city of Detroit, Michigan, the worlds of two individuals intertwine to forge an inspiring tale of love, resilience, and transcendence. Mark, a resilient disabled black man living a life of solitude, stumbles upon Angela, a young girl ostracized by society due to her mysterious abilities. In the sprawling metropolis of Detroit, Michigan, nestled between the high-rise buildings and bustling streets, lay a small apartment housing a man named Mark, a former soldier of commendable courage. He had been endowed with the testaments of war, not medals, but the loss of his legs. A pair of prosthetics served as reminders of the war and the price he had paid for his bravery. His spirit, however, remained indomitable, and despite the life-altering injury, Mark had built a self-sufficient life, challenging his physical limitations with sheer willpower and determination. The sun would rise, and Mark, with the meticulous precision of a soldier, would navigate his small apartment. Everything within it was organized to perfection, designed to allow him maximum independence. He'd prepare his meals, clean, and even manage minor repairs. Mark had his routine down to an art. Each move calculated and precise. The world outside his window moved at a frenetic pace, but within the walls, life was calm, ordered, and predictable. Yet, as the day would slowly fade into night, Mark would find himself confronted with an adversary he couldn't overcome with physical strength or determination. Loneliness. His apartment, a sanctuary of independence, would morph into an echo chamber of solitude. The nights were long and filled with silence that was almost deafening. The walls of his apartment, covered with pictures of a past life, friends lost to time and war, seemed to mock his isolation. As a black man with disabilities, Mark faced a double-edged sword of prejudice and stereotypes. Society saw his wheelchair before they saw the man. He was subjected to patronizing attitudes and ignorance. As many failed to see beyond his physical disability, he was, to many, an object of pity rather than a person with his own desires, dreams, and aspirations. Mark yearned for companionship, for someone who could see past his prosthetics, past the color of his skin, and recognize the person underneath. He longed for meaningful conversations, shared laughter, a comforting presence when the weight of his solitude became too heavy. Despite the world's persistent attempts to pigeonhole him into stereotypes, Mark held on to the hope that he would one day meet someone who would see him for who he truly was, a resilient fighter with a big heart and a zest for life. His loneliness wasn't a byproduct of his disability but the consequence of a society that was quick to cast judgment and slow to understand. His life was not a sob story but a testament to human resilience, an illustration of the human spirit's unyielding ability to adapt and persist even in the face of adversity. Mark was not a man to be pitied but to be admired, an embodiment of strength, determination, and indomitable willpower. His story was not yet complete. He had much more to offer, and he was patiently waiting for the day when someone would truly understand and appreciate that. The humdrum of the local Detroit supermarket was a comforting reminder of life's ordinary moments for Mark. Each aisle and shelf had its familiar rhythm and organized chaos he found oddly soothing. It was during one of these routine visits that his world was changed forever. At the far end of an aisle, huddled near the towering shelves, he noticed a small figure, Angela, surrounded by a group of older children. Her frail body shivered with fear as harsh words rained down upon her. Angela, known in the neighborhood as the odd girl, was often subjected to such unsolicited cruelty. Stories circulated about her mysterious abilities, casting a pall of fear and mistrust around her. An orphan with no one to shield her, she was the town's outcast, isolated and misunderstood. Mark, watching from a distance, felt an uncomfortable knot tighten in his chest. He recognized that loneliness, that despair in Angela's eyes. It mirrored his own. He had faced similar prejudice, a similar lack of understanding, but where he had his walls to shield him, Angela had none. Without a second thought, he wheeled himself forward, inserting himself between Angela and her tormentors. The children, taken aback by his firm voice and unyielding gaze, retreated, their taunts fading into the supermarket's background noise. Mark extended a hand towards Angela, a silent pledge of support. His heart ached as she looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. She took his hand, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. In the following weeks, Mark found himself drawn towards Angela. He visited the dilapidated orphanage she called home, brought her groceries, and spent time listening to her stories. He was captivated by her strength, her resilience, and her acceptance of difference. He saw in her not an oddity, but a unique spirit who, like him, was yearning for acceptance. Angela's abilities didn't frighten Mark. Instead, they made him curious. They were inexplicable, yes, but they were also a part of her, a part he was eager to understand. He saw the potential in her, the potential to change not just her life, but the lives of those around her. With this realization, he took the first steps towards adopting Angela. there was a world of paperwork, of questioning looks, and silent judgment, but Mark was undeterred. He saw in Angela a companion, a daughter, a spark of light in his world of solitude. He believed that together they could bridge their loneliness, dispel the darkness with the light of mutual understanding. It was a risk, a leap into the unknown, but Mark was no stranger to challenges. As a soldier, he had stared death in the face. As a disabled black man, he had faced society's prejudices. Now, as a prospective father to a girl feared for her differences, he was ready to face a world that was quick to judge and slow to understand. He was ready to fight, not just for himself, but for Angela, for their chance to be a family, for their chance to belong. The first few days of Angela's arrival at Mark's apartment were quiet, almost hauntingly so. The small space that had once housed a lonely man was now a sanctuary for two souls seeking solace and understanding. Angela, now away from the austere walls of the orphanage, clung to the shadows, hesitant and watchful, her eyes reflecting a world of fear and uncertainty. Mark, a man accustomed to routine and order, found himself at a loss. Angela's quiet, almost ethereal presence threw him off balance. His attempts to connect with her were met with silence or fearful glances. Angela was like a skittish animal, bracing for a strike at the slightest sound. It was clear she was scarred, not just by society's ridicule, but by the abandonment and neglect she had endured. Yet, Mark was undeterred. His soldier's patience was his greatest ally. He gave Angela her space, allowing her to adjust to her new surroundings. He maintained a gentle routine, making sure she had her meals, her own space, and the reassurance that he was there not as a threat, but as a protector. As the days turned into weeks, Angela began to lower her guard. Mark's unwavering patience and the absence of judgment allowed her to feel safe. She began to respond to his kindness with small, tentative steps, a nod, a half-smile, her hand reaching out for the meal he prepared. These were all small victories, and Mark's endeavor to gain her trust was just as determined as his effort to understand Angela's abilities. He watched as Angela manipulated small objects with her mind, her concentration intense. He marveled at the strength and control it required, recognizing it as a part of Angela, not something to fear but to understand and respect. He began to help her control it better, to use it as a tool rather than to be used by it. As their bond strengthened, Mark found himself in a unique role, a father. His relationship with Angela blossomed from that of a caregiver to a father figure. Moments of understanding and acceptance paved the way for a deeper connection, one that transcended the traditional roles of parent and child. Angela, in return, began to view Mark not just as a protector, but as a friend, a confidant, someone she could trust. She had started to laugh, her giggles echoing in the once silent apartment. She began to share her thoughts, her dreams, her fears. In Mark, she found a safe space, a father who saw her for who she was, not what she could do. Together, they became a testament to resilience, challenging society's narrow perception of them. Mark, once viewed as a helpless disabled man, became a doting father, a figure of strength and patience. Angela, once feared and ostracized for her abilities, was now a vibrant, giggling girl, a beacon of joy in Mark's life. They were proof that families were not always born out of blood but could be formed through shared battles, understanding, and, most importantly, unconditional acceptance. In the weeks following Angela's arrival, her abilities became more pronounced. Mark had noticed objects around the apartment mysteriously moving, witnessed how Angela would concentrate, her small brows furrowing, and an object would shift or rise as if by magic. He had known about Angela's unique abilities, but witnessing them firsthand was a profoundly different experience. One day, as Mark was performing a minor repair on a light fixture, precariously balanced on the rung of a ladder, Angela was watching, her tiny fist clenched in anticipation. Suddenly, the ladder wobbled, Mark's grip slipped, and he was tumbling down. Time seemed to slow, but even as fear gripped him, he saw an unexpected scene unfold. Angela, her eyes wide with terror, lifted her hand. The falling ladder halted in midair, hovering inches from the ground. It was a startling spectacle, but what was even more shocking was the intense focus on Angela's face. She was controlling the ladder, using her powers to break his fall. As the realization dawned, Mark was awestruck. He knew Angela was special, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. His fear was replaced by immense respect and a surge of gratitude. He was not scared. Instead, he was comforted, knowing Angela had the ability to protect herself and those she cared for. The incident marked a turning point in their lives. Angela's abilities were no longer a whispered secret but a vivid reality. While it was a shock, Mark accepted it with grace, his bond with Angela deepening further. He grappled with this newfound knowledge, understanding that this journey with Angela would be anything but ordinary. However, he was reassured that altogether they would navigate this extraordinary path, their connection strengthening with every challenge they faced. Mark's world was spinning. The revelation of Angela's abilities had thrown him into uncharted territory, one fraught with uncertainties and questions. His first instinct was fear, a primal reaction to something beyond his understanding. He grappled with this newfound knowledge, his mind racing to make sense of Angela's reality, of her ability to manipulate the physical world with her thoughts. The initial days after the incident were a blur of anxiety and confusion. He would often find himself staring at Angela, marveling at the paradox she presented. She was a little girl full of innocence and childlike curiosity, yet she possessed an ability that could easily tip the scales of normalcy. But as the days passed, his fear gradually gave way to acceptance. He found himself not terrified of Angela's powers. His view shifted, seeing not a threat but a gift, an extraordinary capacity within a child he had grown to love. Determined, Mark decided to embrace Angela and her abilities completely. He began to assist her in understanding and controlling her powers, engaging in exercises that helped her focus and hone her skills. Mark was no longer just a father to Angela, he had become her mentor, her guide, her anchor in a world that feared and misunderstood her. As Angela's control over her powers improved, Mark saw a unique opportunity. Angela's abilities were not a curse but a gift that could benefit others. They could use her telekinesis to assist those in need, to make a positive impact in their community. It was a lofty idea, a goal that seemed far-reaching, but Mark believed in it, believed in Angela, and in their ability to redefine their roles in society. Slowly but surely, Angela and Mark began to make a difference. They reached out to their community, assisting where they could, turning Angela's powers into a force for good. The girl who was once feared and ostracized became a beacon of hope, a symbol of strength and resilience. Angela's transformation from an outcast to a cherished member of the community was a testament to her courage and Mark's unwavering support. Mark, once a solitary man, had found joy and purpose. His life was no longer marked by the absence of his legs but enriched by his role as Angela's father and mentor. He discovered a sense of fulfillment in his efforts to nurture Angela, to guide her in using her abilities for good. His journey with Angela had illuminated his existence, turning his solitary life into one filled with love, purpose, and an extraordinary little girl. Their tale was a powerful narrative, a beacon that shone brightly against societal prejudices. It spoke of acceptance, resilience, and the transformative power of love. It was a testament to the fact that everyone, irrespective of their abilities or disabilities, has a unique light within them, a light that when recognized and nurtured, has the potential to illuminate the world around them, to change perceptions, and to inspire hope. Their story was not about a disabled man and a special girl. That's all for today's story. If you like it, please subscribe and give it a thumbs up. See you next time.